and welcome to our special Thanksgiving political episode of 2024.
Gobble, gobble.
How you doing today, John?
Doing pretty good. Excited to discuss these movies since I had not seen yours before.
Yes, and I'm so excited for your pick because I'd only seen it once in my 20s, so I was really excited to revisit it.
Sweet. That'll be a fun discussion on both ends.
Yeah, we hope you guys enjoy it, and welcome to Movies You Missed podcast. We are two industry veterans who love to recommend movies to you without spoiling them. For those of you who have been listening for over a year, you know we love to pick political movies on our Thanksgiving episode. It's a bit of a joke between John and I and for our audience, since we always say that the last thing you want to talk about is politics on Thanksgiving, so why don't we pick political movies?
Absolutely.
And what's even more special about both our picks is they're actually based on true stories.
That's true, because these events actually really took place.
They did, and technically we're going in chronological order this week in terms of the events, not in terms of the release dates.
Aha!
So that'll be really interesting to talk about. But before we do that, you all know we love to discuss the new movies we saw either on streaming or in theaters this week.
That we do.
And unfortunately, you were the only one able to watch some new movies this week. I'm very jealous.
Oh, well, all right.
So I'm very excited to hear what you watched.
Yes, let's get into it. I only watched two new movies. Both were on streaming because I was traveling last week with the wife. We went out to see her family. And as we were winding down on the first night, we decided to put this movie on Amazon. There's a first one, so this is actually a sequel, 4 years later from the original. The original is called My Spy with Dave Bautista and Chloe Coleman. We watched My Spy, The Eternal City, which is the sequel, and it was very okay. I'd give it like a C-. The first one was far better. We were big fans of My Spy. I don't know if you had a chance to see that one.
No, I haven't.
Oh, all right. Pretty good movie. Not, anything super special, but entertaining nonetheless. And My Spy, The Eternal City had a couple of good laughs, but overall was a very unnecessary sequel, in my opinion.
As they so often are.
Exactly, yes. Very tough to find a really good sequel these days, unless it's Wayne's World 2 or Addams Family Values or
Those
Rush
are all
Hour 2.
very old.
Yeah, well, exactly, yeah. I guess over the last 20 years, then, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
There has not been a lot of great sequels, except for Frozen 2. I was a big fan of Frozen 2.
That's a really good point. I actually like it better than the original.
Likewise, yes. And the second film I watched on Monday. I had about 2.5 hours to kill before I had to be at the bar. And I'm so glad I watched this movie because I read the book a couple of months ago, and you watched the movie not too long ago. I think it's been about 2 weeks since you actually watched it, so you've seen this one already. I did finally get a chance to watch Endurance.
Yes.
Yes. Woo! What a crazy-ass documentary, and it was really pretty fucking fantastic to not only have read the book, but to finally hear Ernest Shackleton's voice and a couple of his crew members' voice, finally see some other photos that are not included in the book and the film reels that were taken.
Yeah, weren't those
incredible.
insane?
Oh my gosh. My only issue truly with the entire documentary, and I completely understand why they did it, was that they colorized the film. But it is what it is.
I actually really like that they did that because I think it actually helps us connect a lot better to that old medium. Back in the day, think about like World War II, really intense film reels from back in the day. Whenever they're in black and white, I feel like there's a disconnect between the audience. And so it's easier to kind of dismiss that, that was a long time ago. So all the bad stuff that happened, that was way back in the day. It's okay. It doesn't matter as much. Whereas when you colorize it, it makes it feel very relevant. I think more relevant. And so I think it's actually better for the audience when you colorize video. And I loved that they had so much documentation from this crew, even though it was back in like 1914, 1916.
Well, I guess we'll agree to disagree on the colorization because it kind of bugged me a little bit. But again, like I said, I understand why they did it. I completely agree with your take on it as well. It makes sense. I get that. I guess it's weird. I'm kind of a purist when it comes to like old reels and would like to see it actually the way it was actually shot. But again, we still got that. And I loved seeing the dogs and the huts and the destruction of the ship as it was being crushed by the ice was insane. Like just crazy. Great documentary. I can only imagine how it was when they... I'm not going to spoil anything here, but I'm going to tell you right now, I cried for the last 20 minutes of the movie.
Me too.
And, it just was insane. And if you are a documentary fan like we are here, definitely give Endurance a shot, especially if you've read the book. It really brings you into it even more so. and I will watch it again. Absolutely, it's definitely a must-watch multiple times.
Good. Well, I'm so glad you had an opportunity to watch it. And I would argue even people who aren't necessarily documentary fans and don't think of themselves as such, it's a great movie that's, I think anyone would be interested and entertained by watching it.
I completely agree.
Yeah, definitely a top 10 movie of the year for me, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. One of the best of the year.
Good. All right, well, now it's time to get into our picks of the week. And the good news is that the events of both of these movies happened quite a long time ago, and so they both would be fine to discuss over Thanksgiving dinner.
I would think so, definitely.
And we are going to start with yours today, John, since this is an odd episode.
All right.
This movie's events take place over about a 2-week period. Please don't take that long to describe the movie.
Well, we'll see what happens.
Okay, take it away.
All right, let's get into it. This film comes to us from the year 2000, although the premiere was in 2000, and the worldwide release was actually in January of 2001. So technically this is, yes, a movie that was released in 2000 limitedly on Christmas Day, and then worldwide in January of 2001. This film is titled 13 Days. This movie is written by David Self. This is based on a book titled The Kennedy Tapes, written by Ernest May and Philip Zelikow. This film is directed by Roger Donaldson. This film stars Kevin Costner, one of my favorites, Bruce Greenwood, Stephanie Romanov, Stephen Culp, Dylan Baker, and Tim Kelleher. This film is pretty damn intense. I saw this movie for the first time, I want to say around like 2001, 2002. My family and we rented it and watched it. We all really thought it was a fantastic movie. And this, I'm going to be completely honest, might have actually been my second time seeing my pick this week.
Same.
All right, well, magnificent. So I don't feel too bad not having seen it over the last 23 years. This film is centered on John F. Kennedy when the Cuban Missile Crisis started to go down in 1962. This is after the failed invasion of the Bay of Pigs in 1961, which was just about a year before all of this started to go down. Kennedy and his cabinet have gotten word that Fidel Castro in Cuba has acquired nuclear missiles from the Soviets. This is a big deal. Of course, it's 1962. The nuclear arms race has really started to vamp up around the early 60s, with all the testing and everything like that. I mean, we've all seen Godzilla, but...
I love that you used that reference point and not Oppenheimer or something for referencing nuclear weapons.
I should have used Oppenheimer because
both
that is
valid.
Definitely... both are very valid. So yeah, why not? Godzilla, of course, we've all seen. That's just a little bit of a fun comedic little tidbit of mine, but we all, I'm sure, at this point, at least hopefully, have seen Christopher Nolan's Oscar-winning film Oppenheimer about Oppenheimer having created the nuclear bomb. So almost 20 years later, after World War II, there are several countries across the globe that are starting to acquire nuclear weapons, come up with the technology to have these missiles just in case anything really starts to go down and we need to, unfortunately, wipe out the planet. Luckily, that still has not happened yet. This episode did just come out today, so thankfully we are still here as of now. And I remember, actually, I think it was it was several episodes ago where I was saying, hopefully Putin doesn't listen to this episode because we might all be wiped out because of it. But very likely not. It's very insignificant for Putin to even know who any of us are, at least V and myself.
He's
so anyway,
secretly a giant movie buff.
Could you imagine? Yeah, we just we get some email sometime from a member of the cabinet of Vladimir Putin's so Putin really loves it. No, we're not going to get into too much political things on our end here.
Putin loves
today.
Drowning Mona. Thanks for covering it.
He's a big fan of the movie Soul, too. He just loves jazz music and always thinks about death. So, yeah, he's been listening to us for a long time. I fucking hope not.
Oh, God.
So, anyway, back to 13 Days. Kennedy's gotten this information that Cuba has now acquired these nuclear weapons from the Soviets, and Kennedy and his cabinet are really trying to figure out if they need to invade Cuba. And the reason why this is a big deal is because Cuba, as we all know, is very close to the United States, and these missiles could reach any major city in the United States within a 5-minute period. So Kennedy and his brother, Robert Kennedy, is the Attorney General, and Kevin Costner plays Kenny O'Donnell, who is the special assistant to John F. Kennedy. Now, these guys, pretty much a trifecta, are really trying to figure out what exactly they need to do here. Now, the Bay of Pigs is talked about throughout this movie because it was such a failure of an invasion in Cuba. And now Cuba has these nuclear arms. So they're trying to figure out, on top of several other, like the Secretary of Defense gets involved. Of course, every head of the military gets involved. There's meetings after meetings as to what exactly they think would be the best course of action to take these missiles away from Cuba and the Soviet Union on this little island. And they're trying to figure out if they need to completely quarantine the island of Cuba. And Fidel Castro is involved now. In this movie, we actually don't have any involvement. We don't ever meet a Fidel Castro, which I actually really appreciated. I really appreciated the fact that they did not show an actor playing Fidel Castro. We were stuck in the White House for this entire 2.5 hours. Mm-hmm. And the dialogue in this movie truly is spectacular. The cast is amazing. I can't wait to get into the cast because there's a lot of very good actors in this movie.
So many character actors in this movie.
Yeah, big time. And I'm going to tell you what, everybody knows Kevin Costner does not do accents very well, but I really like him in this movie. I like him quite a bit. It's interesting to say, like, this movie, makes John F. Kennedy, and now, again, I don't know a whole lot about the Kennedy presidency other than the fact that, of course, he got us to the moon and that he very unfortunately was assassinated. His brother Robert Kennedy was assassinated a few years later. There's a movie out there called Bobby that came out several years ago. I've never seen that. I've actually not even seen Oliver Stone's JFK. But after revisiting this movie, those are two movies that I will be watching within the next several weeks.
Good.
Because this movie's so fucking good, and this movie is a completely underrated historical drama. And the beauty of this movie is that a very large percentage of the dialogue was taken from the Kennedy tapes, which actually existed because John F. Kennedy liked to record every meeting that he ever had, not only in the Oval Office, but in every meeting that he had with anybody throughout his presidency. And now I want to read this book, The Kennedy Tapes, by Ernest May and Philip Zelikow, because it would be amazing to read the book. And I have two books that I got back in February, one of them being about when Kennedy decided to go to the moon. And I haven't read it yet because I have so many damn books that I'm still trying to read. But that is one of them that I'm very excited about because I know we've talked about it before. I'm a big NASA nut, and the fact that Kennedy was the president that really pushed for us to go to the moon is very historical and very important. But anyway, back to 13 Days. Like I said, his special assistant to the president, played by Kevin Costner, and I actually have not even mentioned who plays John F. Kennedy in this movie, Bruce Greenwood, who, if you don't know him by name,
so good.
You've seen him in so many movies, especially in Star Trek, the last few ones from 2009 and 2011. He played Pike, who recruits James T. Kirk, which is pretty awesome. And the actor that plays his brother, Stephen Culp, I gotta tell you, when I was watching this movie, I was like, this is some solid casting. Not only because of the way they carried themselves and the way they spoke, but they really resembled both of those guys.
Oh, yes, and they talked like them. I thought they all did a really good job, and I love that they cast character actors and not very famous people because you can look past the actor and just believe him to be John F. Kennedy. And I love Bruce Greenwood. I think he's a fantastic actor, and I was so happy to see him in this role.
I was too, and I completely had forgotten that he played John F. Kennedy. So it was like 25 minutes in, and then when Stephen Culp shows up, I was like, he really looks like fucking Bobby Kennedy. Like, this is crazy. So, again, getting back into just a little bit more of the breakdown of the movie, while all three of them are trying to figure out exactly what to do with Cuba and the Soviets and this Cuban Missile Crisis, which is one of the biggest pieces of American history from the 60s and Kennedy's presidency. I don't think I've ever used this term before. This movie is electrifying. Like, it really just completely captivated me watching it this time around. I'm over 30 short from 40. When I first watched it, I was in my teens. So watching it again now and having a little bit more understanding about how politics kind of work, and Kennedy still being one of those very beloved presidents, I felt for the guy, how can you not? Like, it's so intense. And for the rest of the movie, we are treated to a not only political decision, but a humanitarian decision of whether or not trying to figure out how to end this peacefully with Fidel Castro and the Soviets, or quarantine them and take them by force. And again, this is a year after the Bay of Pigs, which was a massive failure of the Kennedy presidency. So he's hoping that this, again, will not be another failure of his presidency while in office. So it's a very heavy drama, beautifully written, beautifully shot. The acting is truly top-notch. And like you said, V, the fact that it's character actors other than Kevin Costner, just a very well done, very well put together movie. Costumes are great. I loved, there's a lot of West Wing in this movie too, a lot of Steadicam work that is just awesome.
The dialogue too felt like Aaron Sorkin. It was sharp dialogue.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. David Self wrote a very good script. And again, we were very lucky to have the dialogue actually ripped from the Kennedy tapes. So that's my take on the movie and my appreciation for this movie. I feel like this could be a movie I could own and watch maybe like every 5 years. Just kind of like be reminded of like what happened in 1962. Because it's just a crazy ass time in politics in the 60s with John F. Kennedy. So V, I'm curious, like you said, this was your second revisit to 13 Days. I would love to know what you thought of the movie.
I was so happy you chose this movie. I, too, had not seen it since the early 2000s, and I appreciate it more now in my 30s because I have more patience. This is a political drama. Even though it's about the Cuban Missile Crisis, there isn't a ton of action in this movie. It's not like it's a war movie in any way.
Yeah, no.
There's a reason why we're all still here, and it's because the Cuban Missile Crisis was not a war movie.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was so happy to revisit it, and it was absolutely enthralling. The dialogue is so sharp, like we said. From the get-go, I was happy. Trevor Jones was the composer on this movie. He's the one who composed The Last of the Mohicans, Notting Hill. I'm a big fan of his. And seeing JFK and RFK together, and as an adult remembering that they were both killed only a few short years after these events, was really heart-wrenching, especially because my mom always talks so fondly about Bobby and how she was so hopeful that he would be a presidential nominee, and he really, really cared about people and social programs, and she was absolutely, just like the rest of the country, heartbroken when he was assassinated as well. As an adult, understanding just how much was at stake during these 2 weeks.
Oh, for sure.
Them talking about it only takes 5 minutes for one of these missiles to reach Washington, D.C. We would have no time to evacuate anyone. And I really liked how this movie is laid out. There are so many different characters in the decision-making process of what was going on. And I like how there are subtitles under everybody when they start talking to let us know.
Oh, yeah, I love that too.
Robert McNamara was there. Everybody in the Joint Chiefs was there. And saying exactly who everybody was super helpful to keep everybody straight because there is a very large cast of characters.
Big time.
And this movie felt very authentic as well. All of the cars were period accurate. The clothing. I like how when they announced to the press corps that JFK was planning on speaking that night, they're like, and we want him on all 3 networks.
Yeah, I know. That was great. All 3.
There's one transition in the movie that I absolutely loved that I thought was so clever, and it's when JFK and Kenny, played by Kevin Costner, are talking, and he's getting ready to address the nation. JFK leaves the Oval Office, and Kenny closes the door behind him. And when he turns around, the whole press corps is there, and it's later that night, and Kennedy is back behind his desk getting ready to address the nation. And that edit was so clever, and it stuck in my mind. I had to write it down. I was like, that was awesome. I love that transition.
I was sitting here, and when it happened, I was like, oh, hell yeah.
Right?
Like, that's cinema right there. Like, and it's so subtle.
It's
just so fucking cool.
It was, and they mention a book in this movie called The Guns of August, and it's about World War I. I've read that book. It is fantastic. It's
sweet.
Totally heartbreaking, like many war books are, and war movies, but I highly recommend it, and they reference it a couple times in this movie, so I wanted to take note of that. And like you, I loved revisiting this movie. I enjoyed every single minute of it. I certainly want my parents to watch this movie. I don't think they ever have, because this movie, and I texted you this a couple days ago when we were watching the film, it is criminally underrated. This goes to the core of our podcast and its purpose is discussing and recommending movies that completely flew under the radar. This is the quintessential underrated movie. It is fantastic. The acting from the very large ensemble is very good. The set pieces are super authentic as well. Everything looks period accurate, even the way they talk and how respectful they are. I really, really loved it. And some of the quotes in this movie really, really got me. And I, again, goes back to the dialogue and how it was written. There's 2 pieces of dialogue that I really want to discuss. I think they really illustrate just how much was at stake here, and looking back how the world could absolutely have ended.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them is, let us hope the will of good men is enough to counter the terrible strength of this thing that was put into motion.
Yeah, heavy.
And it's not hyperbolic and it's not over dramatized. Like, this really could have ended the entire planet.
Yeah. And there's always talks like, oh, Russia has nukes and like we definitely have them and, you know, our allies have them and stuff like that. But there's a moment in Oppenheimer of dialogue that is truly gut-wrenching.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen Oppenheimer, we don't spoil things here, but it is so poignant and so absolutely fucking true. This movie, watching it after watching Oppenheimer 3 times now in the last year, like I had brain matter on the wall. Like I was just like, my mind is blown.
Well,
if this was to go a different route, like we probably would have been back in the Stone Age.
Or not around at all.
Or not around at all, yeah.
And I think as we've gotten older, we're able to understand this threat a little more acutely because as kids, we did these stop, drop, and roll fire drills when we were in school. Our parents did the nuclear fallout drills. Our children, or theoretical children, the subsequent generations from us, are now doing shooting drills, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We are actually a very lucky in-between generation where all we had to worry about was fire. Like, not a big deal, right? And for some reason, we always talked about the Bermuda Triangle and quicksand in our generation for some reason.
Bermuda Triangle was a big thing.
It was. But with our parents' generation, them doing those nuclear drills where, of course, getting under the desk wouldn't have done anything. It's just really window dressing to help people feel better.
Right.
But not understanding that threat growing up, we couldn't see that this was as big a deal as it was.
Yeah.
And now seeing this movie as adults, we understand just how dire this situation was. And my father talked about JFK a lot when I was growing up, and so much so that it got me really interested in him, and my senior paper in high school was actually written about JFK.
Oh, cool.
And one of the things that he always talked about when it came to the Cuban Missile Crisis, because we did talk about that repeatedly when I was in high school growing up, he always said to me, if it weren't for JFK and Bobby, we'd all be dead.
I've heard that several times, yeah.
Because cooler heads prevailed. I mean, it's historical drama, no spoilers, we're all still here. We know what happened.
Right.
But because he was able to thread this needle and deal with the Cuban Missile Crisis the way that he did, my dad always said he was one of the only people in America who could have done that.
I've heard that same thing, you know, and you think about the fact that he was such a young president, you know, he was in his early 40s. And again, going back to Oppenheimer, Kennedy is mentioned in Oppenheimer very briefly.
Oh, that is such a great line.
It is, absolutely, and that's the crazy thing, you know, it's like towards the end of World War II when all of that stuff was going down in the court cases with Oppenheimer. Yeah, anyway, don't want to get too off topic of this film because I'm sure Oppenheimer will be on this podcast at some point soon.
Well, it's still talking about nukes, so it's in the same realm, right?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I said it several minutes ago. He got us to the moon. You know, he got NASA even more off the ground than it already was, and I am very grateful to him for that, and the fact that my grandfather worked on one of the rockets that took Apollo 11 to the moon is pretty fucking cool. So Kennedy he's looked at as definitely one of the most beloved presidents that the United States has had over the last like 80 years, you know, like he's one of those presidents that is looked upon as like one of the more, like you said, even-keeled and very much a respected politician.
Yeah, pretty scandal-free other than cheating all the time, but otherwise, like he was a... like
I
you
wanna be loved. Oh, no. No, it was Happy Birthday, sorry. Yeah. Oh, we didn't even talk about it in the Wayne's World episode last week.
Oh my God, we didn't. But we can always talk about Wayne's World, it's okay.
But we can.
But that's one of the reasons why another piece of dialogue in this movie is so poignant, is because at one point somebody says, if the sun comes up tomorrow, it is only because of men of goodwill. That's all there is between us and the devil.
Oh, yeah, that's a good moment.
Because this is a dialogue-driven movie, the script had to be so good in order to make this movie, right? In order to make it memorable or good at all.
Oh, hell yeah.
And the script is so fantastic, and I like it because, again, it doesn't feel over-dramatized. This was literally life and death in terms of the world, and these men took on that burden so well, and it's just so impressive to see now what they had to deal with and how they had to make these decisions at almost a moment's notice, right? And with all this outside pressure. And so, yes, thank you again for picking this movie.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of my favorite picks that we've discussed over the last couple months because it's so underrated. Sweet. I really want to. I'm really happy to champion this movie, so thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you feel that way. When it ended, I was like, holy fuck. And I'll be honest with you, I watched it twice in a week because I was like, I got to watch this again. Like it was one of those. I've done that a lot. If I really like a movie hits me, I'll watch it like twice within 24 hours. And I rented this on Apple because I don't own a physical copy of it. So in my 48 hours of the rental period, I watched it twice.
Nice.
And I was just like, not only because it's so good and so this and so that, but it's just a piece of history that, again, saw the movie when it first came out, early 2001, 2002. I watched it at home, did not see it in theaters. It's just so important, and I'm glad you feel that way, and I do too. And one other thing before I get into a little bit more of the behind the scenes of the making of this movie, since this is based on factual evidence of what actually went down during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I want to talk about Robert McNamara real quick. He ended up having a meeting with Fidel Castro a few years after the Cuban Missile Crisis finally ended. McNamara asked him if he would have actually launched missiles, and Fidel Castro said yes.
Holy shit.
And then Fidel Castro said to Robert McNamara, you also would have destroyed my country, and that would have been totally fine.
Wow, that's a mic
drop
right there.
That's some shit, right? Yeah, exactly.
Mutual annihilation, baby.
No, it's just mind-boggling.
And Dylan Baker did such a good job playing Robert McNamara when he's in war room towards the end and has that speech. I was like, yes!
Yeah, Dylan Baker is a fucking awesome actor.
He is.
He's, again, another character actor that has been in so many movies. He has 153 acting credits to his name. He's in my wife's favorite horror movie that we watch every year, Trick or Treat. If you don't know him by name, check him out. He's got a phenomenal list of acting credits to his name. There's also another actor in this movie that, V, I wonder if you recognized, Tim Kelleher. He played Ted Sorensen. He had black hair. He was very thin, very sharp chin.
Yes.
I recognized him, and I could not place him until I IMDb'd him, but he is the one that gives Cobb the plane ticket in Inception.
He is also the radio control guy in Independence Day.
Independence Day, exactly. We're just not causing enough damage. I know. I was like, oh, yeah, okay.
All right, everyone, protect this guy.
Yeah, exactly. I want you to look after this guy, okay? Yeah, I love it.
Recognized him from.
So awesome. Going back to the whole Fidel Castro and Robert McNamara meeting, in 2001, Kevin Costner, who plays Kenny O'Donnell, actually screened the movie for Fidel Castro in Havana.
Whoa!
Yeah. Could you imagine being in that fucking room? Just watching a movie about something that took place 30 plus years ago?
I would say at least 13 Days doesn't put Castro in a super negative light. I mean, they don't talk shit about him. They don't say he's a puppet.
Exactly.
They don't say that he's just some idiot that's letting Russia stomp all over him. So I would be comfortable screening that movie for Fidel just because I'm like, oh, he's not going to kill me afterwards because this isn't insulting.
But that's me. Again, that's what I'm saying. That was my point earlier. Like they don't show Castro at all. Like they don't paint him in some negative light. They don't paint him as like some fucking whatever. And I think that really worked for the entire movie, is like that we as a nation, right? Like we're watching our president at the time deal with this. But there's no communication between Fidel Castro and Kennedy at all. None of it. It's not like Dr. Strangelove, where the president calls Dimitri drunk. And they sit on the phone for 5 hours. Yeah. I think he's drunk, sir. It's good to be fine. Could you imagine?
I'm fine. It's good to be fine.
Are you fine as well? Oh, good.
Well, I think back in, this movie's made in 2000. I think there would be a really big risk of making Fidel more of a caricature than a real man at the time.
Absolutely.
And so I think that was a really smart storytelling decision, not even to have Fidel appear.
Again, that's exactly how I felt as well. So anyway, let's get into a little bit of the BTS before my time runs out and we jump into your awesome film for this week. Bruce Greenwood and Steve Culp, they were playing brothers in this movie. Stephen Culp was Robert Kennedy and Bruce Greenwood was John F. Kennedy. A few weeks before this movie went into production, both of these actors ended up spending several hours a day on the phone with each other, trying to nail the Boston accent and become brothers on the phone.
Nice. Yes. There definitely
it resonates dynamic on screen.
It does.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but during setups after scenes were shot or they were changing, directions of the camera and whatnot, they would go off somewhere else on set and start having arguments with each other as Kennedy and as Kennedy.
Nice.
Getting a little method there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's the scene in the movie where the pilots are actually being shot at. You remember that sequence?
Oh, yeah, that was badass.
While they're flying over Cuba. Very awesome sequence. The pilots in those planes are actually related to two people that were involved in this whole thing.
Ooh, cool.
David O'Donnell, the grandson of Kenny O'Donnell, was one of the pilots.
Oh, shit.
Yes, and Christopher Lawford was the nephew of John F. Kennedy.
What?
Yeah, and these are actors in this movie, but they are still related to two very key people that were involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis.
But they
Obviously,
were
the president being one of them.
really good actors.
Oh, hell yeah, I know. Yeah, they did a great job.
The lead pilot, Christopher Lawford, who you said is...
nephew of John F. Kennedy.
He was so good, and when he's on the phone with Kenny and then what he does afterwards was so impressive. I would never have thought there was any sort of connection. I just would have figured he was a really good actor.
I completely agree. Yeah, when I read that, I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Robert Kennedy actually did at one point call for a full invasion of Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Really?
And John F. Kennedy actually ended up shutting it down. Yeah, there's a scene in the movie after a meeting with both Robert and John F. Kennedy where the general leaves the office and goes, these fucking Kennedys are going to kill us all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was related to the fact that Robert wanted to actually launch a full-scale invasion on Cuba at the time.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty nuts. The destroyer in this movie, DD-850, was loaned to the production from the Battleship Massachusetts Museum, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, I want to go to that museum then.
I would definitely like to do that. And the ship DD-85 actually portrays two ships in this movie. It portrays itself and another ship, DD-753, and active duty naval and naval reservists were actually cast to play on the ship during the scenes as well.
That's how they could do all those exercises so well, I bet.
Exactly, yeah. They weren't just background actors that got there that day and were read the sides by the second AD
yeah.
and being like, all right, guys, so you're going to do some push-ups, you're going to do some of this, you're going to do that. It was as authentic as it could have been.
Run up the stairs.
Yeah, exactly. Now, this is actually an interesting piece of just history in general that also does pertain to the Cuban Missile Crisis. The first nuclear submarine from the United States was actually launched in 1959. The Soviet nuclear sub that was launched was in 1961, and that was the first one that the Soviets ever launched, and that was 1 year before the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is also fascinating because in 1961, there's a film with Harrison Ford that came out called K-19 The Widowmaker that is about that first nuclear submarine that was launched in 1961, which is a fucking awesome movie.
It is.
Directed by Catherine Bigelow. If you have not seen that movie, check it out. It's badass. Harrison Ford's a Russian. He doesn't do a terrible job at a Russian accent, but the movie itself is pretty badass. Yeah, he definitely doesn't do a great job.
But he
does a little bit better of a job. It is great, but he does a little bit better of a job than Costner's Bostonian accent.
Fair.
In this movie. But John Hamm was worse in The Town.
Yes. Oh, shit. There's nobody worse than a Boston accent than John Hamm.
That's funny. Now, I mentioned this before. The release date was December 25th, limited release in 2000. The U.S. premiere was actually December 19th of 2000, and the worldwide was actually January 12th of 2001. So this is technically a 2000/2001 release because they were within a month of each other, the premiere, the limited, and the worldwide. So I'm just going to go with calling this one a 2000 release and not a full-on 2001 release.
Yeah, because it was released in the U.S. in 2000, so that makes sense. And
exactly.
Releasing it on the... Nothing says Christmas like a nuclear weapons conflict.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. The budget for this film, $80 million.
Oh my God. Because they talked a lot? Like, no, there were
reasons for $80 million.
There are good reasons for $80 million. It makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. It does. And one thing I actually wanted to get into also was that Kevin Costner was approached to direct this movie at the time.
I would have been fine with that.
I think I would have been too. Martin Campbell's another one that was approached to direct this movie, but he turned it down to go direct The Mask of Zorro. And if you don't know Martin Campbell by name, he directed Casino Royale, which I do not like, but he also directed GoldenEye.
He did, yes. I love Casino Royale.
Yeah, I know you do. You're wrong, but that's okay. All opinions are valid.
It's the only Daniel Craig James Bond movie that I like.
Oh, okay. All right. Man, maybe I should watch it again. I just didn't like any of the ones I saw. I think I saw 3 of them. But Francis Ford Coppola was also approached to be a director on this movie.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. After Apocalypse Now, I think he could have done a good job with a political thriller.
I think that his war movies are better based in a war zone than a political thriller.
I gotcha. All right. I can understand that. Like I said, $80 million was the budget, the domestic box office. And again, this was early 2000s. A lot of political dramas were not very, sought out, movies that we're not really going to. And we'll get into the year 2000 in just a second, and we can very likely understand why this movie only pulled in domestically $34.5 million.
Yeah.
And worldwide, only 66.5.
Oh,
so unfortunately,
man.
It did not do very well box office-wise. But we love it. It's definitely a movie, like you said, very criminally underrated. So if you have not seen this movie, please do check it out. It is not available for free on any streaming service. I rented it on Apple. It's definitely a revisitable movie and another insane piece of history, and I can't wait to get into your pick this week. But before we do, I've got just a little bit of time left, so let's talk about the year 2000 and the highest-grossing films of 2000. Number 1, my future pick of mine, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, starring Jim Carrey. Number 3, Gladiator. Number 4, The Perfect Storm. Number 5, Meet the Parents, which I truly am just not a big fan of at all.
Nope.
Number 6, the first Hugh Jackman-led X-Men.
Oh my God, I remember when that came out.
I do too. Saw it opening day with my dad, and we loved it, and I went and saw it like 3 or 4 other times after that.
Awesome.
Number 7, Scary Movie. Number 8, a past pick of yours, What Lies Beneath.
Yes.
Number 9, Dinosaur from Disney. Number 10, Aaron Brockovich. Great movie. I've read the screenplay. Definitely a deserved Oscar for Julia Roberts. I can understand that. She deserved it, but at the same time, so did Ellen Bernstein for Requiem for a Dream that year.
Exactly, yeah.
Number 11, Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps. Number 12, The First Charlie's Angels with Lucy Liu, Drew Barrymore, and Cameron Diaz.
Who is out of retirement.
That's very true. Number 13, Martin Lawrence and Paul Giamatti. A lot of people forget Paul Giamatti's in this movie. Big Mama's House.
Dumb.
It's actually not a great movie at all. Number 14, a future pick of yours, I believe, with Denzel Washington. Remember the Titans.
Oh, yeah.
Number 15, The Patriot. Number 16, What Women Want. So congrats to Mel Gibson for having 2 top 20 movies of the year 2000. Oh, wait, no, 3, because number 17 was Chicken Run. Number 21, a past pick of mine, Space Cowboys.
Yes, speaking of the space program.
Yeah, exactly. Number 24, U571. Number 26, Stuart Little. Number 29, The Kid. Number 31, a great comedy, Road Trip. Number 32, Bring It On. Number 34, a past pick of yours, The Cell.
Yes.
Another past pick of yours, coming in at number 41, The Whole 9 Yards.
Yes.
Number 48, another past pick of yours, Galaxy Quest.
Also taking place in space.
Yep, another space movie. Number 49, a future pick of mine, The Road to El Dorado. Number 52, Robert De Niro and Cuba Gooding Jr. in a movie that, you're still shocked I haven't seen, Men of Honor.
Yes, I'm adding that to the list right now for the next time I come over.
Perfect. Number 53, one of the greatest sequels ever made, Toy Story 2.
Yes, it is a fantastic sequel.
Number 55, Dennis Quaid and Jim Caviezel in Frequency.
We're going to fight over who picks that one.
Yes, we are. Number 56, a past pick of mine starring Keanu Reeves, The Replacements. Number 58, a wonderful movie starring Sandra Bullock, Benjamin Bratt, Ernie Hudson, and Michael Caine, Miss Congeniality.
A future pick of mine.
Yes, indeed. Number 60, one of Danny Boyle's worst movies, only based on the critics' take. I didn't hate it so much, but Leonardo DiCaprio and Tilda Swinton in The Beach.
That movie's just weird.
It is weird, but it's kind of fun. Number 63, a future pick of yours coming from Disney, The Emperor's New Groove. Number 65, Little Nicky. Number 68, a great Brendan Fraser and Elizabeth Hurley film, Bedazzled.
No, God, that's one of the worst movies ever made.
Oh, it's so funny and awesome. Elizabeth Hurley's a hot devil.
God.
Number 76, a future Arnold pick of mine, The Sixth Day.
Oh, guilty pleasure action movie. Nice.
Absolutely. Number 79, a great stoner comedy starring Ashton Kutcher and Seann William Scott, Dude, Where's My Car? Number 81, a past pick of mine, Return to Me, starring David Duchovny and Minnie Driver.
Aww. Yeah.
Number 85, Bless the Child. Number 89, High Fidelity. 97, Titan AE. Number 100, one of the worst films that has ever been made. I've never seen it, but I probably will at some point because why not? Battlefield Earth.
That is one of the worst films ever made.
I know. I've never seen it.
Oh my God. We should get really, really stoned or really, really drunk one night and watch that film together.
I love that idea so very much. All right, that is the year 2000. Thank you, everybody. That is 13 Days. V, it is time to get into your pick this week.
Thank you so much. I think that's a good idea, and we'll just fast forward about 10 years from your pick.
Yes.
In terms of the date of the events, not in terms of the release date of this film, though, because it was made many decades before yours was. But before we get into it, since we've been talking about military war movies, and you just mentioned it during the box office list of the year 2000, what if we did U-571 and K-19 as a submarine episode?
Ooh, I like that.
I mean, Das Boot would be awesome, but it's like 4 hours long.
Yeah, that actually would be a very long episode.
Yeah.
We could just do that movie
by
as
itself. Yeah. We might be able to do that at some point too, because it's a great movie, a masterpiece actually, but it's just really, really long.
Definitely. It is absolutely a great movie.
Yes. I like submarine movies for some reason. Would never be in one. I've done tours of the maritime museums, there's one in San Francisco, and just getting into the submarine, I'm not normally a claustrophobic person, but there is no way in hell I would ever be a service person on a submarine.
Yeah, that would be brutal. I don't know how they did it.
Never going down to see the Titanic either. So getting back to our topic of the week, political thrillers based on true stories. Very niche episode this week, but I think we both had really great picks. I'm so stoked that you are being introduced to this film. It's a classic. It's on AFI's top 100 films of all time. It was actually made in 1976 based on events that happened in 1972.
Mm-hmm.
I picked the classic starring Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford, All the President's Men.
Awesome.
This film is about the reporters Woodward and Bernstein. Even if you've never seen this film, you've probably heard those names said before.
I have a couple of times.
Yeah. These are two Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists. Bob Woodward is still around, still writing books, still reporting on things. He's actually won 2 Pulitzer Prizes in his life because he's that good. Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward are 2 reporters at the Washington Post. Dustin Hoffman plays Carl Bernstein, who's a bit more of a seasoned reporter, whereas Bob Woodward plays kind of the new guy. He's only been around for 9 months. That is the one thing about this script that Bob Woodward did not enjoy, is that it painted him as a little bit more of an amateur, a little bit more wet behind the ears, and someone who kind of followed Bernstein around a little bit more like a puppy dog because he was trying to learn. And in fact, that wasn't the case. They both respected each other, and Bob Woodward had been around the block a couple times, and so he was a little bit upset about his portrayal. Otherwise, how can you be mad that Robert Redford plays you in a movie?
Right? It's funny watching this movie. It's like 30 minutes in, and I'm just like, I don't know if I've ever seen Robert Redford in anything.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm not. I don't think so. I've always ever heard of him. I just don't think I've ever seen Redford in a movie.
Okay, well, first of all, let's go through some of his credits. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is the classic one.
I have a VHS copy. I've just never watched it.
The Sting is another movie that he stars with Paul Newman in. The Way We Were with Barbra Streisand, the original Great Gatsby, 3 Days of the Condor, A Bridge Too Far, The Natural, which is a baseball movie that I'm sure I need to introduce you to, because one of my missions in life is introducing you to Westerns and baseball movies. Out of Africa with Meryl Streep, and The Horse Whisperer, it's one of his movies from the 90s, and Spy Game with Brad Pitt.
Oh, okay. You know what? I started Spy Game, but I started it while I was waiting for one of my grandfathers to come out of surgery, so I never did finish it. I think I got like 30 minutes in, and I was like, "This is not the movie I need to be watching right now."
No,
so I never finished it.
Well, it's a good movie to watch in your 30s as well. So I think it's definitely one to revisit. Most of those movies are on my list, so don't worry about it.
Oh, okay. You know what? I'm actually very clearly speaking out of turn because I'm going through his list. I have seen the remake of Pete's Dragon, which I thought was actually pretty good. He's in that movie for about 8 minutes.
Okay, it doesn't count.
Okay. And he was also apparently in Endgame and Winter Soldier. So I've seen those, but I don't know how long his moments were in those movies.
Not super long.
I guess forgettable enough for me.
He directs S.H.I.E.L.D. He's the head honcho of S.H.I.E.L.D., and Samuel L. Jackson reports to him.
Gotcha.
He's very good in The Winter Soldier, actually.
I really like that movie.
Certainly out of character for him. I don't understand. Okay. It is one of the best MCU movies ever made, and I forget what happens that movie 5 minutes after I watch it every single time. I don't
I've
know
seen
why.
it once, but I remember it ended. I was like, that was killer.
Yeah, I've seen it 4 times.
Why was it killer?
Yeah, I've seen it 4 times. I forget every single time.
Oh, crazy. All right, so I have seen Redford in some stuff, but I guess I've never seen, I was going to say, I've never seen his staples. How about that?
Yes, him starring in a film.
Yes.
Well, now you have, because you've seen All the President's Men. I think that's actually a really good introduction since it's rated so highly as a film. But yes, future picks, especially The Sting and Butch Cassidy. I'm really excited to introduce you to those.
Hell yeah.
And Dustin Hoffman plays Carl Bernstein. We've mentioned him a couple times because, well, you have actually, because not only was he the star of Tootsie, your pick from episode 122, but he also is a co-star in Perfume, your pick from episode 133.
And a cameo in one of my picks for Christmas, the holiday.
Yes, I was going to mention that as well. I love that little cameo. Super cute. He also
go anywhere.
He also starred in Midnight Cowboy, Kramer versus Kramer. One of the worst movies that has unanimously been agreed upon is one of the worst movies ever made, Ishtar.
With Warren Beatty.
Uh-huh.
I've never seen it, but I have heard it is a train wreck.
My mother is, she's a medium fan of movies. She's more of a fan than Amy, less of a fan than us in terms of how often she watches movies. But she is a fan, but she will talk so much shit about that movie. I remember growing up, she's like, oh yeah, that movie's terrible. I'm like, wow, okay.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, Dustin Hoffman was also in Rain Man, Outbreak.
Oh yeah.
Wag the Dog, Runaway Jury, and Hook.
Oh, of course, Hook. Absolutely. Hook.
Oh, my God. And that's the thing. I think we're secret fans of Dustin Hoffman. There's a bunch of those films that are going to be on our list.
I wouldn't say secret. I definitely have always had a fandom for him, but I guess I just don't talk about him enough.
No, I never thought I was a fan of him. And then I started looking through his credits recently since he's been in a couple of our picks. I was like, well, I do love most of the movies that he's in.
Yeah, no, he's usually pretty reliable actor.
His performance in Runaway Jury, I loved so much. When there's this monologue that he does, it gets me every time, gives me chills. So really excited to talk about. It's a great
movie.
Yeah, really excited to talk about him in the future. He's a multiple Oscar winner. He was nominated for Tootsie and Wag the Dog. He won for Kramer versus Kramer and Rain Man.
Oh yeah, Rain Man is a great movie.
It is. And so those are the men who play Woodward and Bernstein in this film. Now, getting into the plot of it, as I said, it takes place in 1972 in the run-up to Nixon's re-election campaign. And these two kind of nobody reporters at the Washington Post, they don't lead any desks. They're not on Metro. They're not on national news. But they actually both kind of stumble upon this small story that is about a burglary that happens in the Democratic National Committee's offices. There are 5 guys who are arrested breaking into these offices. And the story unfolds from there because Woodward and Bernstein follow this trail and just keep pushing to where it leads. And where it goes... all the way up to an organization called CREEP, which is the Committee to Re-elect the President, and the short term that everybody calls it in DC is CREEP. And and this actually becomes quite a scandal. And these men continue to write stories about exactly who was behind this break-in, why the break-in happened, and how far it goes. And I can tell you, no spoilers, because if we're United States citizens, most of us know what happened. It goes all the way to the top.
God. Not to go off topic, but it reminds me of Benjamin's little monologue at the end of Wayne's World. It'll take you everywhere, almost to the top.
And it does. No, it's true. It does. And there are a couple reasons why I absolutely love this film. First of all, because I love that it is a slow burn. It is very methodical because it follows Woodward and Bernstein from the beginning all the way through to the conclusion of this scandal. And the work they put in and how much they had to be persistent, how many doors they had to knock on, how many times they were hung up on.
Oh, yeah.
These men had the audacity to find the truth. I really wish we still had reporting like this. It's hard to find now. I think Rowan Farrow is one of the few journalists that I think really embodies this kind of investigative journalism still to this day. Rowan Farrow is the one who has uncovered several scandals, including everything about Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, sweet.
Ronan Farrow is also working on a new story that's becoming a documentary, actually, and it's about spyware on all of our phones.
Oh.
Ronan Farrow is I think the new iteration of Woodward and Bernstein, and so this investigative journalism is something I really respect, and just how hard they had to work. And I love that the movie depicts that, because so many times in movies you'll have this montage, right? It's like a training montage or it's a learning montage, and it skips over all the hard, tedious work.
Right.
It's basically The Matrix, where you just upload it into your brain. And that's what every montage is. It's like, oh, this seems so simple. They just become an expert. It's like, no, in real life, this is a pain in the ass. They're up late nights. They get yelled at all the time. They get doors slammed in their faces. And I love that this movie depicts that accurately.
I was a big fan of that too. It's funny because when I rented it on Apple, it was like 2:18, right? 2 hours, 18 minutes or something like that. And I was like, oh shit, kind of similar to Perfume. You were like, I didn't know this was a 2.5 hour movie. I didn't know that about All the President's Men. So I was like, oh shit, it's a 2.5 hour movie. It really helped move the story along. And again, show the tediousness of and the late nights that these guys would like go to these secretaries' houses or whatnot, at like 11:30 midnight. And it's kind of funny because thinking back to those days, and I've thought this all the time, is like, when do these people sleep? If they're up at midnight and they have to be up at like 5 a.m. to get to the office, it was very fascinating. So I really appreciated that it wasn't done in like a 4.5 minute span. It was done in like probably like a grand total of maybe like 45 to 50 minutes of the movie.
And how talented of a filmmaker do you have to be in order to depict all this tedious work without making it feel tedious to the audience?
Exactly. Yes. No. 100%.
Because this movie isn't slow in terms of
not at all
feeling bored or, oh man, this movie could have been 20 minutes shorter. I don't think so.
Oh, definitely not. No, we needed everything. It was very important. Similar to 13 Days, you need that time to tell this story properly.
Yeah.
And in a time frame that makes sense too. Like I think if 13 Days had been maybe another half hour, it could have been a little bit of a tedious watch. And same with this movie. Like it ended where it needed to. It went where it should have. Time-wise, it made complete sense.
And 13 Days is over 2 hours long, too.
Yeah, 2:25.
Yeah. Both use every minute wisely, though.
Absolutely.
So that's the gist of All the President's Men. It's following these two reporters uncovering the Watergate scandal. That's the term that's used. Like, it's similar to Cuban Missile Crisis is what 13 Days is about. The Watergate scandal with President Nixon is what All the President's Men is about. And the title's fitting once you watch the movie.
Oh, big time. Yes, it is. I know, it's funny. I've seen this movie around, advertised. Actually, Whitney Ann Adams just watched it the day before I watched it.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, she posted on her Instagram watching All the President's Men. I was like, I've never seen that movie, but I'm going to be watching it in the next couple of days. And the title is perfect.
It is, and similar to your movie, as we've gotten older, we understand the stakes that are involved. These are outsiders. These people are not in the White House. In fact, they're trying to get information from the White House. But the stakes are still there, and there's a really key moment about what is writing on this when they're releasing these stories, and that's the audio clip I wanted to choose for this week.
The results of the latest Gallup poll? Half the country never even heard of the word Watergate. Nobody gives a shit. You guys are probably pretty tired, right? Well, you should be. Go on home. Get a nice hot bath. Rest up 15 minutes. Then get your asses back in gear. We're under a lot of pressure, and you put us there. Nothing's riding on this except the First Amendment of the Constitution, freedom of the press, and maybe the future of the country.
And you have to remember that this is during a time similar to your movie, right? There are only 3 networks. There are only a couple papers. We didn't get instant access to what was happening in the United States, instant access to news. We couldn't just hop online and see what was going on. We had to rely on honorable journalism in order to understand exactly what was happening behind the scenes in this country.
Oh, yeah.
That's why this movie, I think, is really important. But also, that's why journalists like Woodward and Bernstein are so crucial to the American discourse, to our citizens' knowledge of what's going on. And it's just a really great reminder to me, and this is why I love the movie so much, of why searching for the truth is so important.
I completely agree.
So now, you've mentioned a couple things, so it seems like you enjoyed the movie, but I want to ask you just directly what you thought of the film.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I will be as quick as I can. I loved the entire thing. It was super fascinating. I've grown up, of course, similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis, always hearing about Watergate. It's referenced in so many different political dramas that I've seen, and I got to be honest with you, I love the way that it's portrayed in Forrest Gump. I always thought that was hysterical.
Yeah.
It was very fascinating because I've watched movies like The Post, with Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, and for whatever reason, that just put me to sleep. sleep. Like, I could not. It's a Spielberg movie, but for whatever reason, it just did not captivate me at all. And I love Tom Hanks and I love Meryl Streep, but I guess for whatever reason, that movie just didn't do it for me. Similar to Spotlight. I tried watching Spotlight a few years ago with Michael Keaton and Rachel McAdams, the Best Picture winner, about the whole thing with the Catholic Church. Just did not grab me like I thought it was going to. This movie, though, within the first 15 minutes, I was like, okay, I'm into this. Like, the way that it's structured was great. I like how we meet Robert Redford's character. And I love how Bernstein is in Ben Bradley's office, and he goes, give me the Watergate thing. And he goes, well, where's your other piece? And he goes, it's done. And he goes, well, give it to me. He goes, well, I'm polishing it up right now. Like, he goes out there, and clearly he's not done. He's just trying to get a new story. And I like how they actually meet, in the office. I thought that was a really awesome way for them to start becoming partners. And just every actor in this movie, very similarly. Now, granted, Dustin Hoffman, Jack Warden, and Robert Redford, they were names at the time. And I think the guy that plays Ben Bradley also was. I'd seen
Jason
him.
Robards, yeah.
Jason Robards. I'd seen him many, many times. But everybody else, character actors, right?
Yeah.
Like, nobody that was super famous, but they all delivered so well. And the way that Woodward is like going around and calling all of these potential leads, and there's a scene where they get a name and he starts going through like every phone book of every state, like that. And I'm just like, this is how it fucking was. Like, you couldn't fucking Google anybody. Like, none of that shit. They were all on typewriters. None of this shit. There was no computers. It was just so fucking badass. And again, going back to like 13 Days, super period authenticity. Like, just fantastic costumes, fantastic lighting, like very similar to Zodiac. This is how it probably felt and looked in these offices. Just a really, really very well done film. And I don't think I looked away from the screen the entire 2.5 hours.
Awesome.
Sometimes I'll like pull up my phone and be like, "Who's this guy?" I didn't do that at all. Like,
nice.
I wasn't Googling anything about Watergate because, again, I grew up hearing about it, especially with me reading Hunter S. Thompson when I was in my early 20s. He was just a Nixon hater and always talked about Watergate and how fucked up Nixon was, and all this stuff. So I love the title cards. The way they use title cards in this movie, fucking awesome. So awesome. Just, a really, really well done movie. And the shot where they're in the library going through the cards.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy. That pull out to just, it was so simple, but it was just like, I think the way that it signified the magnitude of what they were doing was just so fucking brilliant. Like, it was so badass. And what's interesting, maybe you'll get into this in a minute, but similar to Tootsie, there's a couple fucks, and this movie's PG rated.
There are 11, and at first it was rated R, but because it was politically important, they appealed, and the MPAA said it could be rated PG.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really love this movie. I'm very grateful for you to introduce me to it because, again, I've been seeing it, over the last probably 30 years. Anytime I go to, like, Best Buy or Circuit City, if anybody even remembers what Circuit City is.
Classic black and white cover of the movie.
Yeah, and both of them. And I'm like, you know what? I just don't like Robert Redford, but I like Dustin Hoffman. Maybe I'll watch that movie. And so here we are now, however many years later. And, I gave it a round of applause at the end. I was just like, yeah, that was fucking good.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. And yes, it was a little bit easier to create the period authentic cars and clothes and everything because remember, this all takes place in 1972. The resignation and conclusion of Watergate happens in 74. And then, and the book is written, and then the movie is released in 76. This was a very quick turnaround.
Very quick turnaround.
And I actually have a love-hate relationship with President Nixon because I took a couple of, one of my majors was political science when I went to college. And so I actually took a class on American presidents and we went through every single one at the time. And I actually have a love-hate relationship with Nixon because yes, he turned out to be kind of a dirtbag, but he created the EPA. So there were a couple things he did well, and he wasn't a completely bad guy, not the greatest president, obviously, but there were a couple of shining moments of his presidency that I respect. And I agree with you, the way that Woodward and Bernstein meet is one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie because of what Robert Redford says to him.
Yes, I loved that shit. I was like, respect. It's like, because he could have easily just like thrown that in his face and be like, you fucking asshole.
Mm-hmm.
But no, because he had only been there however many months, and Bernstein had been there for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that back and forth between Jack Warden and the other actor about like who should get the story.
Yeah.
That whole thing was awesome.
Yes, and Jack Warden, we've talked about him a couple times on this podcast because we've picked movies that he's in a couple times.
Oh, we absolutely have.
Because he's the grandpa in While You Were Sleeping.
Hell yeah.
And he also is the owner of the football team in The Replacements.
Yeah.
So Jack Warden is one of their bosses, and Jason Robards is another one of their bosses. He's actually the head of the entire paper. He is Ben Bradley, who's played by Tom Hanks in The Post.
Oh, interesting.
Because The Post is a direct prequel to All the President's Men.
Well, son of a bitch. Now I'm going to have to rewatch The Post and hopefully not fall asleep.
Because very briefly, All the President's Men refers to another break-in into the office of psychiatrist Daniel Ellsberg.
Oh.
It was an attempt to discredit him because he was the employee who smuggled out copies of Robert McNamara, Robert McNamara, the man who was in 13 Days, who was in JFK's cabinet. Ellsberg smuggled out copies of Robert McNamara's scandalous documentation of how the U.S. handled the Vietnam War.
Oh.
These are called the Pentagon Papers, which you and I have heard that term many, many times in our lives, right?
Definitely. Absolutely.
So Ellsberg smuggling these papers out and then their attempt to discredit him is what's depicted in The Post.
Wow.
That happened.
Okay.
So the Pentagon Papers scandal happened before Watergate. So The Post is a prequel and actually leads up to the beginning of the movie All the President's Men.
Well, that's pretty badass. I will have to rewatch The Post now.
That is cool. I haven't heard great things about The Post. I haven't seen it, but it's one of those Spielberg movies that he's done similar to Ron Howard, where and also Ridley Scott. They've just been kind of hit and miss over the last 10 or so years, right?
There's definitely been some misses on all three of them.
But Jason Robard in this movie plays Ben Bradley. He's the head of the paper. And he's been in a bunch of movies, including Magnolia and Once Upon a Time in the West. He was also in Parenthood. He also has a very small part as a congressman in Enemy of the State.
Ah, hell yeah.
Yeah, another one of your Thanksgiving political picks in the past.
Absolutely. I think year one of Movies You Miss podcast.
I think so too. Other than them, yes, like you said, a lot of these actors are very recognizable, including Deep Throat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Deep Throat is played by Hal Holbrook.
I saw his name in the credits, and he's just in the dark so much, I could not place him. I was like, who is this fucking guy?
Yes, that is Hal Holbrook. He is the old man in Into the Wild, my pick from a couple months ago.
Yes.
And he also plays the elder version of the main character in Water for Elephants.
That's right.
And William Goldman is actually the writer of this movie.
Yeah, I know that name.
Yes, we do. We're big fans, and I'm sure a lot of our audience are as well, even if they don't recognize the name, because he wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the original Stepford Wives, Marathon Man with Dustin Hoffman, A Bridge Too Far with Robert Redford, the book The Princess Bride. That's what he's most well known for.
Definitely.
He also was the screenwriter on Misery.
Yes.
Based on Stephen King's book. He also wrote Chaplin, one of Robert Downey Jr.'s best roles. He wrote your pick, Maverick.
Yes, he did.
And he also wrote a movie that I really enjoy that I've toyed with putting on this podcast. He wrote The General's Daughter with John Travolta.
Oh, yeah.
He's a great writer. And Alan Pakula was the director of this film. He also directed Sophie's Choice, Presumed Innocent with Harrison Ford, The Devil's Own, another movie with Harrison Ford in it.
Oh, yeah, and Brad Pitt.
Horrible accent, speaking of bad accents. Brad Pitt's
really?
Irish accent is bad.
Oh, he goes Irish,
huh?
I
It's
think
awful.
In 7 Years in Tibet, I think he tries to do an Austrian accent.
Yeah, that was also bad.
Just was a failure. The movie's great, but his accent is not great.
But that is why Guy Ritchie had him play a gypsy in Snatch, because he couldn't do an accent that was intelligible.
That is hilarious.
Yes. Alan Pakula also produced To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, all right.
And he directed your previous Thanksgiving political pick, The Pelican Brief.
Yes, he did. Man, we have done a lot of awesome directors, writers, and actors on this podcast in the last 2.5 years.
We really, really have. And I love talking about people who are not household names who deserve the recognition that they are due because of their talent. This is one of my favorite parts of this podcast, is getting people familiarized with the names of the people behind the scenes of the movies they love.
I agree.
Including a lot of our friends, which is why we're going to have more guests on this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And this film had an $8.5 million budget.
Wow. Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the 70s. It makes sense. It's small. Now, we love to talk about movies that came in under budget or were wrapped ahead of schedule. You know, Clint Eastwood's really good at that, right?
Oh, yeah.
This film was $3.5 million over budget and 35 days behind schedule.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But it was well worth it because this movie's so good, including one scene where Robert Redford's on the phone, and this is when he's starting to talk to one of his sources. It's a continuous 6-minute single take.
Such a great scene, and loved it.
And towards the end, Robert actually, because he's trying to switch between two calls, right? Because he gets another call and he's going back and forth. He accidentally misnames one of the callers when he's switching back and forth. It was totally accidental, but he stayed in character and kept going. And so that genuine mistake stayed in the movie.
I love that. That's awesome.
Which totally makes sense because when he was switching back and forth, I was like, yeah, I would have screwed that up too. And speaking of, just like you talked about in 13 Days, both Bruce Greenwood and Stephen Culp going behind the scenes and working together with each other, Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford did the same thing. In fact, they memorized each other's lines.
Oh, awesome.
And they did that so they could interrupt each other in character.
No way!
Yeah, because they had such an intense and productive back and forth with each other when they were working on this story.
Fucking A. That is awesome.
The problem is this unsettled a lot of the supporting actors who were just trying to act alongside them. Which makes sense. And,
I guess that definitely makes some sense.
Yeah, and this film is actually the one that introduces us to the catchphrase, follow the money.
Ah.
That term can actually be traced back to All the President's Men.
Very cool.
But similar to your movie, because it's based on a true story, as you said, the Kennedy tapes were used extensively to write the script of your film. Nothing was allowed into the script unless it had been meticulously verified and confirmed by multiple independent sources.
Hell yes.
And
Damn.
I'm wondering, because they released this film so close to the events of it, that they had to have so much scrutiny on it.
I would think that would definitely be the case.
Because
you don't want to Hollywoodize anything too horribly.
No, because
like
there's
take it out of context or anything like that.
No, because there's criminal cases that are still going on. This involves powerful people in the United States, and you'd be in a lot of trouble if you produced something that was inaccurate.
Oh yeah,
regarding
for sure.
Real people who are still very much alive.
Whereas nowadays, Ridley Scott's like, fuck it, I don't care. Napoleon can be as incorrect as possible. Same with now apparently Gladiator 2.
We're going to put sharks in the Coliseum.
Yeah. Still love Ridley Scott, but you know what I mean.
Not lately.
Yeah.
And Jane Alexander, the one who played Judy Hoback, who was the bookkeeper.
Oh, yeah.
She's a key character in this film and in this story. Jane Alexander actually met with Judy Hoback multiple times to prepare for her role in the film. And Alan Pakula and his producers actually rented out her house in Georgetown so they could shoot the scenes with Jane Alexander and Dustin Hoffman in her actual living room.
No, that's so cool.
Isn't that so cool?
That is so cool. Where he goes to and like meets the sister first, and she's like, "Would you like some coffee?"
He's like, "Can I have a cigarette?" Yeah, and he's like, "I was just there for 6 hours."
Right. Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that is the real living room. Again, the benefits of filming this movie so soon after the events that took place.
When I was watching that scene, and even when they go back later, when they're on the deck outside. Mm-hmm. I was like, this is a really cool house. Like, I wonder, like, what kind of production budget they had to build something like this, or was this done on a stage? But wow, the real house, so cool.
The only thing that was built on a stage was the Washington Post headquarters and the bullpen where everybody was working, because they tried to film at the Washington Post headquarters, but all of the journalists who were going to be just playing background for them kept looking at the camera and kept trying to act, and so like, this isn't working. And so they built a stage that was the Washington Post headquarters, and they actually went to the company that sold all of the desks to the Washington Post and bought all the desks they needed. It was $100,000 of the budget.
Wow.
Because
just on desks.
Just on desks, because each of those desks were multiple hundreds of dollars.
That's wild.
Yeah. And Hal Holbrook was actually the only choice to play Deep Throat.
Oh, very cool.
Bob Woodward looked at various actors' headshots because he was helping with the casting, because at the time, this was 1976, nobody knew who Deep Throat was. Nobody knew who Deep Throat was until the 2000s.
Wow. Holy shit.
Yes, in 2005, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a while. So Bob Woodward was helping with the pre-production of this movie, as I said. He was the one who was looking at all of the actors' headshots to help cast Deep Throat because he was the only person who knew who he was. He insisted to Alan Pakula that Hal Holbrook was the best choice to play Deep Throat. Because in fact, Hal Holbrook does bear a very strong resemblance to who Deep Throat really was, which was Mark Felt, the deputy director of the FBI.
Damn, talk about a whistleblower.
Yes, that was the man second to J. Edgar Hoover.
Damn.
Yes.
That is insane.
Yes. And we aren't the only ones who think this movie is awesome because it was nominated for multiple Academy Awards.
Yes, rightfully so.
It was actually nominated for 8.
Awesome.
Best Film Editing, Best Sound, Best Art Direction, Set Decoration, Best Writing, Best Director, Best Actress in a Supporting Role, Best Actor in a Supporting Role, and Best Picture.
Wow, hell yeah.
It won 4. It won for Best Sound, which I agree with given all of the really badass sound effects that it had in this movie.
Well, that and the phone calls were very, very easy to hear, which
very
is,
clear.
Can always be a tough one in movies.
Especially in 1976.
Yeah.
It won for Best Set Decoration. Again, like I said, they built the Washington Post for this movie.
So cool.
William Goldman did win the Oscar for Best Screenplay.
Hell yeah.
It was Best Adapted Screenplay, in fact, because it was adapted from the book. Jane Alexander did win for Best Supporting Actress.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
Yes, she won for portraying Judy Hoback, the bookkeeper. And Jason Robards won for Best Actor in a Supporting Role by playing Ben Bradley.
Very cool.
He is one of the only people in history to win back-to-back Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor because he won for this film, and then the following year he won for Julia, which starred Jane Fonda and is Meryl Streep's very first ever film.
Oh, wow.
In each case playing real-life people.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so Jason Robards was killing it in the 70s.
Hell yeah.
And that is All the President's Men. Unfortunately, like your film, it is not free to stream on any service, but it is available to rent. I highly recommend it. I believe John does too.
Oh, big time.
Well, I'm glad we were able to go in chronological order given these were real-life events.
As am I. That was great.
Yeah, I agree. And, oh, God, thanks again for picking your film. I think we're both really happy and appreciative of each other this week.
Big time.
Good, good. And, John, would you watch 13 Days with your grandma?
I would, yeah. My grandmother, my grandfather was involved in the military up through, I want to say, 60s. So I think it would have been a fun watch. I mean, I say fun a little loosely, but I think it would have been a good
film,
watch.
That's true.
Yeah, definitely. My grandmother, as I've always said, she loved the horror movies and some twisted movies, but I feel like it would be a movie that my grandmother would appreciate.
Because she lived through it.
Exactly, yeah. And V, would you watch All the President's Men with your grandmother?
Oh, absolutely. My grandmas would have loved this movie. And I really want to remind my parents about this movie and introduce them to 13 Days. I think they would really enjoy both these films. And I really want to watch 13 Days with my dad, especially because of all of our conversations about JFK when I was growing up.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Now, given the subject matter in this movie, and more importantly, the way it is told to us, which is dialogue-driven,
yes,
I would say late teens and above would actually enjoy this film, like 17, 18.
Yeah, I would say that about both. Now granted, there are people and teenagers that are going into like political history, want to be majors and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily just in college, but there's the AP history classes and stuff like that throughout high school. So I feel like anywhere between like 13 would be good for both of these movies. I think they're very important, very substantial movies, especially if you want to learn about the history of politics in the 60s.
I think that's a fair argument. There isn't any content there's no sex in either of these movies. There's not really any violence. There's some depictions of armed conflict, and that's it.
Right.
A couple, like you said, there's a couple of fucks in All the President's Men. I was thinking more in terms of attention span, but like you said, and you're absolutely right, I remember taking AP classes all throughout high school. Thank you for that reminder. And yes, I think it really depends on the teenager. I was thinking more in terms of keeping their attention, but yeah, if you have, any of your kids are really into history or politics or presidents, they can definitely watch both of these films.
Agreed.
Well, all right. That wraps up our Thanksgiving political special. We hope you all enjoy your day tomorrow, however you enjoy to celebrate it, or not. That's totally acceptable, too. But we hope you enjoyed this episode as a whole and this topic. That was a lot of fun. And, God, we love introducing movies to each other. It's always such a great discussion, so thank you for that.
Hell yeah. This was a lot of fun. Had a great time with this one.
Good. I'm so glad you feel the same way. And, John, do you want to tell our audience what we're doing next week?
I shall. We are jumping into our third reviewer request episode. So our winners, Gavin and Vince, you won't know what movies we're doing just yet, but I imagine you will be pleasantly surprised, as will the rest of our audience.
Yes, thank you both for participating and sending us your lists of movies. These were hard choices for both of us.
Oh, yeah.
You both gave us very good lists, so...
Big time. Very happy with both.
We'll certainly talk about what you suggested in the episode as well as what we picked, but thank you so much for being loyal listeners, and we are so excited anytime we have an opportunity to do a reviewer-requested episode.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
All right. Well, if you ever want to be involved in a reviewer request episode and win one of our contests in the future, all you have to do is rate our podcasts. So please go on to either Spotify or Apple Podcasts, write up a review, and you will be entered into a future reviewer requested episode contest. And until then, we like to close our episodes with film is a form of art, and in art, every opinion is valid, except if you think...
Political thrillers need to be slam-banging action adventures.
Good take. Yes, not everyone has to be enemy of the state.
Yes, not at all.
Great movie, but these ones are awesome too.
Definitely.
All right, everyone. Thanks again. Until next week. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everybody.